Hey, it's me again. And Unholy's back, and so am I. Wow, this spec is tremendous. I think it needs no introduction. Unholy is an incredible spec. They listened to a lot of the things that I was talking about, and it feels really good to have a medium to communicate a little better. They freed up PvP talent customization, and the power level of the spec and the various builds that it can play is actually through the roof. While not being oppressively overpowered like the ret rework. So I feel like we're actually in a spot where other specs can play the game. I see Frost Mages flourishing and Boomies flourishing and other specs as well. So Unholy, I think, is in a great spot, and it can remain in that spot, which would be nice because I don't want to play this class for 3 months again before it gets absolutely guttered, and I hope that they don't do that. I know that they shouldn't. So anyway, I'm going to give you all the tools. 4 different builds, all with their own unique playstyle to give you exactly how you want to play Unholy and the biggest power that you can put into that playstyle, which I think you'll enjoy a lot. I even named them so you can remember which ones are which. I'm also going to give you all the gear and embellishments and PvP talent customization and effectively everything you could possibly want to know for how to play Unholy at the maximum possible level that you could. And I hope that this guide is as thorough as you're used to from me, because I'm going to put a lot of energy into making it so. And we're going to start with gearing. And you'll see just how thorough I'm going to be, because I'm going to give you every single piece of gear that you want. I'm going to go through each piece and tell you exactly what you want. We're going to start right here at the bottom with the insignia. You don't grab badge because it has crit on it. Haste is a better stat, and you grab the insignia. And you're going to hear that a lot. Haste and mastery are your 2 best stats by far for output, while verse is fantastic for survivability, but you get it by default for every PvP piece that you put on. So you actually need to reduce your verse a little bit so you can have the most possible output and get wins at the highest possible MMR in the solo shuffle, which I know we're all addicted to. So let me show you how to do that. Insignia, like I said. Now, I grabbed the verse mastery ring. Mastery and haste are both so good that you could choose either, and I'll wrap that up at the end of this gearing talk. But I personally went with mastery. The APOC into 4 wounds burst, all stacked heavy mastery, feels so good that I just couldn't get enough of it. So I went mastery route, but you can split haste and mastery however you want. Again, I'll talk about that at the end. Here's my mastery ring. Now you're going to craft a ring. It's called the Signet of Titanic Insight, and you're not going to put an embellishment on it. What you're going to do is you're going to grab a trophy from Calderax, who sells trophies for conquest. So you can use that trophy to upgrade this crafted ring to 450. You're not crafting it with an embellishment, you're crafting it with a missive of Fever Flare, which gives you haste and mastery. This is one way to lower your verse so your output goes up while not losing too much survivability, because you have enough verse again from your PvP pieces. And this comes with a free socket, which means you are just loving it, because you could just grab a mastery socket or a haste one and put it right in there without having to wait a week for your vault. So really cool. So again, Haste Mastery, Signet of Titanic Insight with the 450 mod from Calderax. Right here. This guy. He's a dragon. He's your friend. Okay. Now we get to our first embellishment piece, and that's the Infurious War Boots of Impunity. This comes with set stat, and they are good stats, versatility and mastery. Don't need to explain why those are good. Then it comes with an effect, applying a loss of control effect or interrupting them. Dispelling doesn't matter. Gives you primary stat, and it's not nerfed in PvP. So effectively, you set up your burst cooldowns, and then you asphyxiate somebody, because that is the correct way to play Unholy. Either a healer, or depending on what comp you're playing, maybe you asphyxiate, kill target. Both make a ton of sense based on the comp. But when you throw out that stun, you just get another surge of primary stat, which just adds to your damage while you're CCing them. So it comes at the perfect time, effectively, and that's why everybody uses these boots. Now, the second embellishment is a choice, and I will tell you about that choice right now. Here are the Frostfire Legards. You probably haven't heard of them, maybe you have. They come with Haste Mastery, so they have the right stats, thankfully, and they have a very unique effect. Damaging a new enemy grants you a huge chunk of haste for 10 seconds, up to 5 stacks. Well, you can obviously get at least 3 stacks in PvP, because there's 3 people in a solo shuffle, right? But pet classes, of which there are more than you think. It's not just Hunter and Locke, right? But you have Enhance has Ghost Wolves. Windwalker has Clones. Unholy is a pet class, right? Even Frost can have its little ghoul out sometimes, right? A lot of specs have a way of getting something else that you can apply damaging abilities to, and it will generate this haste. But what's even crazier is classes like, specs like Demo Lock and BM Hunter. BM Hunter with her Dire Beasts and Demolock with their wild imps spawning from the nether, right? These are new pets, which means they are new enemies, right? Your Tyrant is a new pet, which means it is a new enemy, and it will proc this again, which means you can have this haste nearly all the time against those specs. So if you don't want to use this all the time, you should absolutely use it against BM and Demo, of which you will be getting a non-stop generation of massive haste. But what's the alternative, you may ask, because you need a second embellishment? Well, it's definitely Spore Cloak, right? That one you've probably heard about because it is making waves in the PvP community. It is a cloak. I do not have it on my main yet. I will be crafting it. I do have it on my alt, and of course it's good. It gives you Verse Mastery, which again are fantastic stats, so you don't have to worry about the itemization on it at all. And it does come with set stats, and it effectively gives you an effect where when you're at high health, you heal passively, and that's okay. But when you get to low health, you get a huge shield, which helps your healer rebound, get out of CC and rebound you back up. That's why everybody uses it. It's a fantastic save for classes that could use a cheat death effect, which is all of them. Because, I mean, let's just face it, if you live a certain death situation in a solo shuffle and then turn it around, that's a round you just got added to your total, and that could be the difference of plus 40 or minus 40 in solo shuffle, right? So if you need the output or you're playing against Demo and BM, play the Frostfire Legguards. If you do not, or you're getting trained all game, just grab the Lingering Spore Cloak. Because, of course, DK can still die. We are not like Rhett Brothers when they got their rework and they happen to be both the highest damage output and immortal and the best utility in the game. We're actually just a regular specialization. So really hope they understand that and let us be good for more than 14 minutes, because I do not think we need nerfs. We are nothing like Rhett when they were reworked. You can actually play games with other specs in them, like Frost Mage and Boomkin and the new Dragon spec, right? When Rhett was reworked, it was only 4 Rhetts every guy. Okay, I'm not going to... I didn't like that, but... Blizzard, we're nothing like that, okay? So let Unholy be at least A tier for a little while. Although it could be S-. Fine, moving onward. Waste. I grabbed the Scale Wardens because I ran out of Conquest because I'm trying a lot of different things. Just grab the Conquest one. It's ace first as well. Okay, now we get to the tier set. Yes, I still run it. I understand that it's not perfectly optimal stats, but it's insanely close. Look at this. Haste, main stat mastery, fantastic. Crit off stat, then haste, main stat verse, fantastic. Then crit off stat, right? So maybe you have a little bit of crit, but it's off stat on both, and including on these gloves where you get main stat mastery, and that's a huge chunk of mastery, which means you're really effectively losing almost nothing from itemization. And what you gain is a free 4 set. It's nerfed by 50%, but it's still a huge chunk of mastery. And it does happen right on your burst when you press that Dark Transform, which is not as powerful a button, but you still press it for the mastery, and then all your other abilities do more damage. And I already talked about how good a mastery APOC feels, so now you get even more mastery for that APOC. So that covers the entire 4 set, and yes, the piece you don't run is legs, as you already saw. That's because it has crit main stat, which is terrible. Okay, weapon, first mastery. Rune of Fallen Crusader. I'm not talking about that anymore. Bracers, I actually do use Scale Wardens intentionally because, like I said, I chose the mastery route. Those big APOCs feel too good. And I grabbed the Verse Mastery ones because there's no Conquest Mastery Bracers, and I put a socket on. Cloak, Verse Mastery. Necklace, the final thing you craft. Torque of Past Time. It is exactly like the Signet of Titanic Insight, and it is just add a Fever Flare Missive and a 450 upgrade, and you've got a Haste Mastery Necklace. And that is how you get perfect stats. When I hit the PvP dummy, look at this. 61% Mastery, 25% Haste. My verse seems low, but it's just not. I lose 2.5% damage reduction for the most output in game. It's incredible how much pressure I provide, and it is helping me get to very, very high MMR right now. And it hasn't even been a struggle. I mean, my last game was a 5-1. So... at 2600 MMR. So we're loving it. And that's all of gearing. For enchants, I'm speed, sustain strength, strength and stam. I mean, these have been the same enchants the entire season. If you need an enchant guide, Wowhead probably has something. But that is how you perfectly gear on Unholy Death Knight. Thanks for bearing with me. I know some people are coming back to the game, so I had to go over that. And maybe there were some questions that you had that were answered as well. But now we get into the meat of it, the really, really important part. And I promise I will be thorough with this and answer every question. I have 4 builds made for you guys. 4 unique builds, all named accordingly, so you have your own little organizational tools. I'm even going to show you them right now. Swords. Bursting Swords build. Coil / Clawing focus, the Blight focus, and then the Disease, the Full Rot focus. These 4 builds, I will explain the differences between them, but before I do that, I'm going to give you the core of all of them, so I don't have to talk about it all the time. So this is the core setup for Unholy. The top 5 just unlock the tree, so I don't need to talk about that at all. Then you go down the improved Festering Strike line instead of Runic Mastery, even though that was buffed, because Festering Wound was buffed as a PvP modifier, and now it is absolutely insane. Of course, you grab APOC. I've already talked about it. This is just a massive damage cooldown now. And then the final thing in the core is this trapezoid right here. These 7 talents that I'm hovering over. Hopefully you can see that well. It comes across on the YouTube video. These are all mandatory because the PvP mods affected Death Coil, Clawing, Death Coil and Clawing, right? Of course, Bursting Wounds as well. And all of these talents directly buff those abilities by an enormous amount. Whether it's damage, making it free twice, making one increase the damage of the other from Rotten Touch, making it cleave, making it do a dot. I mean, it's non-negotiable. The only thing that's negotiable is this choice right here, where actually both are insanely good, Clawing and Plaguebringer, and I have builds that use both, so you don't have to worry about asking, wait, which choice would you take? I'm going to explain it, I promise. Right now I'm in Clawing, but that is a choice node, and some of my builds swap that choice. But this entire trapezoid of 7 talents is completely locked in, which means this, right, is our core. So the rest of the tree is what's customizable, rather, based on the 4 named talents. So, let's talk about them. The first build, I'm going to go through them in some order. The first one I want to talk about is Coil / Clawing, because this is the one I just played to my highest rating, and the one that I've had the most success with. This is my unique build, I believe, because I haven't seen anybody try it or run it, and that's pretty cool. The reason this is unique is because I drop some pretty impactful things, like a Gargoyle and Army of the Damned, to go all in to affecting my damage, right? Every modifier that buffs you as an Unholy DK because of how hard Clawing, Bursting Wounds, and Death Coil hits. So you can get more modifiers on that than the traditional builds that I've seen my contemporary DKs running, right? But you have to give up some crazy stuff, and it is hard to do that. But like I just said, my last game was 5-1. At 26 Undo MMR, we're doing okay with this, so hear me out. Here's what you get. Ghoulish Frenzy. This is a 10% damage mod for you and your pet. Your pet does a little bit extra damage. That's kind of nice. But for you, and attack speed for you and your pet. And the attack speed for your pet is actually probably even more valuable than the damage, because your pet can apply Festering Wounds, of which you will be bursting a ton in this build, because you got range, Clawing, and you also run Doomburst. So, with Frenzied Monstrosity, you get extra damage, your pet applies more wounds, you get faster attack speed, which scales multiplicatively with your other attack speed modifiers and all your haste, which then gives you more procs of Sudden Doom, which gives you more damage for Death Coil and for Clawing Shadows, and more procs of Sudden Doom for Doomburst, which bursts more wounds, of which you can apply more because of Infected Claws, buffed by the attack speed of all your haste and Ghoulish Frenzy. That's a lot of compounding synergies, but it gets even better. Because, of course, you just grab Super Strain since you're right there, and then 2 stack of Morbidity. Generally, you would do something like this. And you still can. You can make these subtle adjustments. But this is 3% perma damage. And I've noticed that, even though APOC is an incredible button, Army is only going to be once per game, right? So effectively, this is just faster APOC, and the amount of damage, raw damage that I do, just adding an extra 3% permanently, remember, that's 3% permanently, so it's like getting buffed by 3% to all your abilities, which feels really good. It's just so overwhelmingly impactful, and it is multiplicative like everything, so you've got the Reaping buff as well, so you have all that extra damage the entire game, which is more likely to keep them down in the Reaping range, in which you can just devastate them, an extra 20% in PvP onto your Clawing and Death Coils, and your top damage. Let's see if I can see my last game. Oh, that's Blood. Play the Blood lobby. Here it is. Let me show you. Right, so this is my 5-in-1 game, and Death Coil, Clawing Shadows, Festering Wound, Coil of Death, right? That is, the top 4 abilities are all your own abilities, and they comprise over half my damage easily, 60% plus. And they all hit insanely hard. 91k crit, unbelievable. 67k normal. A 61k Festering Wound burst. Yeah, fantastic. So this, my friends, and all of the links will be in the description below, so you can just copy it right over, is the Coil/Clawing build. Again, it sacrifices some iconic things, but as a result, gives you this engine, the Ghoulish Frenzy engine, which gives you more procs and more damage and more wounds to burst more with the procs that you get, which bursts on Doom Burst. Of course, that is the big PvP talent choice. You're going to see Necrotic Wounds in every build, Necrotic Aura in a lot of builds, and Doom Burst in some of the builds, especially this one, which gets so many Death Coil procs, your head's going to be spinning. Okay, now, let's go up to the Swords build. A lot of you probably have seen this one. My Clawing build, again, I feel like I'm the only one who's experimented with that, so I feel really good about it. At least as of recording this video, I'm certainly the only one, and it's one day after the patch, so it's probably going to remain true for a while. But here's the Bursting Swords ones you've probably seen. You end up having to go down this very bizarre, terrible line, which is the Epidemic, Replenishing Wounds, then Bursting Swords, which is fantastic, and then Pestilence. 3 of the 4 of those talents are effectively worthless. Replenishing Wounds is fine, but very low impact. Epidemic, you will never press, ever. Take it off your buy. I don't have it on any of my bars. Do you know why? Because this doesn't have a Death Coil mod. Death Coil hits for 90k, Epidemic hits for like 4. You can't press this button. So, and Pestilence, we've known this to be a meme talent in PvP for the longest time. I mean, keeping people in D&D long enough for it to apply a low chance on one Festering Wound. So, you lose, this is why I experimented with some of the other builds, but you have to lose effectively 3 talents just to get Bursting Swords and get down to Festermine. Because yes, you could grab these and then not do Pestilence, but now you went all the way down here and you still have to get down to Festermine, because if you don't choose Pestilence, you're not a Death Rot, right? So this is what people came up with, myself included, and it is very powerful, but there are alternatives. What you get out of this, of course, is Bursting Swords. Your Festering Wound damage is so high. So making it do 20% more damage perma is just fantastic. But what it really is fantastic for your short APOCs. Because you grab APOC, then you grab Magus of the Dead for even more damage on your APOC. And then you grab short APOC. And then you grab, here's the PvP talent swap, beep, bargain. Now your cooldown of APOC is reduced by 45 seconds and then another 15 seconds. And every time you press it, you get all of the wounds modifiers, including Bursting Swords, and you get a Magus of the Dead who cranks because you only have a 30-second cooldown on an ability. That's not supposed to be that short of a cooldown, right? You got the PvP talent making it even shorter. This build's wound damage is immense, the APOC burst is extreme, and every time you press it, you get an extra little bit of chip damage from Magus and Crypt Fever. Pretty much this build just revolves around doing your standard rotation, coils and clawing and coils and clawing and coils and clawing. At a range, you can still get coils and clawing, you can still burst wounds, and then when you come in for the decisive APOC every 30 seconds, you just put on big chunk of damage, big Crypt Fever that they have to heal through. Sometimes it refreshes a bit of times. I've actually had it be 8% of my damage, which is crazy. And then a Magus that's just peppering them with damage and slows. This build is going around. It is very popular, and it is very good. So, the last one was the all focused on you and the Death Coil and the Clawing synergy. This one is more into the wounds and the APOC synergy. So this one I call Bursting Swords. You could call it / short APOC. Okay, now we go down to Blight. Now things are starting to change a little bit. This one is that build, okay? But it messes around with a few things. It drops the short APOC, which you may think is insane, but you can still burst wounds a ton by pressing Clawing Shadows. And what you gain as a result is a 45-second extra dam, but then you gain an extra stack of morbidity and So now you're going from 3%, which was rank 1 out of 2 with 3 diseases, to 8%, because now it's rank 2 out of 2 with 4 diseases, because Unholy Blight counts. So now you can get an 8% damage mod and 6% perma, which is just a ton of extra wound damage. Then you grab Defile, since you're already over here, and that's another 8% damage to wounds because of Mastery infecting wounds damage. So yes, you're like, wait, you lose short APOC and some other things maybe you're missing here, but the sustained damage you gain is unreal because you have perma morbidity, then 45-second 8% morbidity, then 8% Defile, and you still get those massive APOC chunks, although they're much longer, so then I generally switch out Bargain for Strength. But you can still run Bargain to bring the APOC down a little bit. But your overall damage from bursting wounds is still probably going to be as high or higher, and your Clawing and Death Coil get a huge buff from 8% morbidity Defile, right? So this build is effectively just a variant of the Bursting Swords build with a little bit more sustain and a little bit less focus on the 30-second. It does do unbelievable damage, and it's very, very good against double melee that sit in your Defile. I've had some of the cleave be obscene, but you can also do one more thing. You can actually swap over to Plaguebringer, because Scourge Strike still hits very hard, and will still hit hard with all these, and you have the disease, and the disease, and the disease mod. So you can actually just rot people while chunking them with Bursting Swords, and Bursting Swords also has a cleave effect on it, right? Deals extra damage to all nearby enemies. So all of a sudden, if you queue into double melee, the other builds aren't working for you, and you're like, I gotta try something, I don't know what to do. Try this. And try it with Plaguebringer. Because now you have Morbidity, Defile Cleave, Unholy Blight Cleave, Bursting Swords Cleave, Plaguebringer, Rot. You're just gonna be this ball, this torrent of damage. Your damage output might just be so high that the healer actually doesn't have the throughput to deal with it, especially as dampening ramps up, or if you have a Mortal Strike in addition to your Mortal Strike. This build is crazy, and that's why I said you would literally have 4 unique playstyles to play with. But let's go on to another one you've probably seen. The 5th. I made this its own talent, even though you're literally just taking the last build and switching 2 things. I made it its own loadout because it is so definitive as a talent build. It's all the same stuff, but it's locked in Plaguebringer, and this time, Eben Fever. Or Eben. Eben Fever? It's pronunciation. It starts with an E. Eben Fever, I bet. The reason this is so much rot is because you have all of those globals that do damage still, right? So you have things to get people low, and then you have tools to keep them low, even when you're getting kited, even when you're getting peeled, even when you have to press Death Strike. You probably have the Plaguebringer up still permanently. Even if you've had to press Death Strike for 9 seconds, it lasts for 10. You have Eben Fever plus the Virulent Plague buff in PvP that we just got. Thank goodness for that. You have the full morbidity, and you have the super strain, and you have the blight, right? So you have non-stop disease, coil, coil cleave, defile, even some APOC, some army, virulent plague with super strain, and Eben Fever, and Plaguebringer. You have 15,000 sources of ways to kill people with just pressure. There is almost no way to peel this. This is the disease build. This is what rot really does feel. There's no real way to peel this, right? You can't peel putting blight on somebody, putting diseases on somebody, APOCing somebody, right? You can't really peel any of that. APOC is 1 button press. You can peel like 70 button presses like Unholy had before, but you can't really peel 1 button press. Just grip APOC, right? You have just nauseatingly endless damage with this build. So again, Plaguebringer, Eben Fever, and then you got the rest of that combo. And those are the 4. I've played all 4 of these. Every single one I went higher than 3 wins, except for one, where a healer went 0 and 6, except they didn't. They went 1 and 5 because a Shadow Priest Frost Mage was able to kill my Rep Paladin. That one I didn't think was a very good test. Every other lobby has been tremendously positive, and both my DKs are gaining 300 points probably a day. I think there's an MMR cap in there somewhere, but we'll try and reach it. And those are the builds. I talked briefly about PvP Talent swaps. Effectively, I'll give you the rundown of what each one does in what situation. Doomburst. This is when you have tons of wound generation, but not short APOC. That's when I run Doomburst. Short APOC seems so good, but if you're running Doomburst, it's actually not quite as good because you have this massive source of wound bursting because your coil procs are always. You get so many of these. I mean, it's incredible how much extra damage this adds with the 90% slow. It is actually incredibly bugged. So Blizzard, if you ever do watch this, it doesn't give you 2 Festermite stacks. And if it does the cleave on a Death Coil proc, it will sometimes burst the wounds on something else, but it won't actually burst the wounds. The effect won't go off. So it'll just have the effect of bursting the wounds on something else, but won't burst any wounds. So a long way of saying it doesn't do anything with the Death Coil cleaving sometimes. But when it does do stuff, and against single target like Marksmanship Hunter, Frost Mage, I have killed people from across the map by pressing Death Coil Doomburst, bursting 2 wounds, Clawing Shadows another wound, and then Death Coil Doomburst 2 more wounds. That's 5 wounds that I bursted in a range in 3 globals. Wow. Wow. So again, high wound generation, but no short APOC. Doomburst is fantastic. Necro Wounds is perma, which I have right here. Necro Wounds is absolutely perma, because it is your stackable Mortal Strike and a ton of healing. It's just too good with every comp you could ever play. Bargain is for short APOC build. I made that very clear, but wow, it's just so good. It does all those things that I said it did. Necro Aura is just a really good slot. Anytime you play with another caster, just run this. Just find a way to run it. Drop either Strang, which I'll talk about in a second, or even Doomburst. Just if you're playing with a Boomy or a Frost Mage, give them 8% damage, because it also gives you 8% more damage, and you give them nothing is better than that. And even your caster healer like Disc or H-Pal or Arshaman or even Holy Priest can add some damage, right? With Necrotic Aura, and that's just valuable. Finally, Strang. Promised I would talk about that, yep. Strang is when you are playing against something that gets devastated by a decently long CC chain. What do I mean by that? Stuff without throughput in CC, like HOTS. So, or something that you can kill, which I think is kind of like Arshaman H-Pal vibes. I think this does really, really well into non-Ardruid, maybe even non-Mistweaver. The reason it's not good into Mistweaver, even though they have to cast, is because kicking them is already like really good. So Strang isn't quite as powerful. Like certain things that don't have to cast, like maybe you need to Strang them because they're not going to cast anything you kick. And also Mistweaver stays really far away. And if you get anywhere near them, they port. And they also have Enveloping Mist. So like Ardruid and Mistweaver are maybe not super high value. But then like Disc and even like H-Pal, even though they're tremendously good right now, and Arshaman for sure, just hate the blanket silence. Arshaman has Riptide, but like their hots are not like Ardruid hots, right? So one purge and they take off the Riptide, or it's just so late in dampening that Riptide doesn't do anything and they really have to cast. If you're blanket silencing them and they can't Tide or Link or Healing Stream Totem and they're just kind of stuck there, they can't even start trying to juke you. Then they have to come out of that and start juking, because if they get kicked on Healing Surge, they can't press anything. So yeah, Arshaman H-Pal Disc vibes against the Strang. It's just really good. If you find yourself in a situation where you have a CC chain that does not have a silence DR, which most things don't, but the CC chain ends. So it's like with something you would like Stun Trap Silence is good. Stun Clone Silence is not quite as good, right? Because you can't keep it going, right? You can't silence them on the clone and keep the CC chain going. You kind of have to wait around and wait to get that at the perfect time. The reason why that's impactful, I'm going into a little bit more detail than I would generally go into a guide, but this is a talent that I've seen some people say not to use, and I just think that's totally wrong. But anyway, the reason why leaving a frame or a global is not as impactful, because like let's say they have Link, right? If you have Stun, Trap, and Silence and they have no Trinket, then you can kill in the Silence and they never had an opportunity to Link. But if you're trying to get out of a clone, you can't Silence on the end of a clone because it'll immune it. And if you're not perfect, they're just spamming Link, they get the Link off, right? Or they get the swap off, right? There's multiple panic buttons. That's a good word for it. You get the Strang with a little bit of gap and he gets swapped and now he's fine, right? So maybe with a Boomy, you just run Necro Aura, Doomburst. You got your Bargain, right? Those are sorry, Bargain or Doomburst and then Necro Wounds, right? You don't have to slot it in. And they have Root Beam for their own type of silence, although I don't think they DR because of the way that Root Beam works. But S-Priest has a silence, by the way, and Hunter has a silence, so you don't maybe need it there. You do want the Necrotic Aura with S-Priest because of the magical damage, and there you go. Now you know the PvP talents. Let me talk about them one more time. Bargain, Strang, Doomburst, Necro Wounds, Necro Aura. 5 talents that you all have a different situation of which they could be useful. Dark Sim is too niche. Reanimation is quad nerfed and good riddance. I mean, it was funny to see it have value again, but that mini game of gripping people into zombies is not really indicative of competitive PvP. Rotten Wither is meaningless. Spell Warden is, I feel like it's not quite enough value yet. It's really cool that you can like immune your healer's trap or poly in a DB poly, but the other PvP talents are effectively so pressure defining that can you really do that in a solo shuffle environment when there's no comms and like sometimes there's just like Trinket, or that maybe they deathed it, or maybe they had cooldowns running already so that AMS did nothing and now you don't have AMS for yourself. Bloodforged is the only other thing I wanted to talk about. Near impossible to slot it in because of how good those other PvP talents are. Any time that you would run this, it would be like, but what if they just went my teammates? And then I have a dead PvP talent when I could absolutely have won with the stun into Strength, right? But there are certain lobbies that just say go DK. Windwalker, Arms Warrior, BM Hunter. That lobby probably just says don't go Unholy DK every single round. You have this as an answer for when you're spamming Death Strike to reduce the damage just enough that your healer can catch up. So if you're ever in a situation, you've tried everything. They always say go DK. BM Hunter stun traps your healer and says go DK. The Windwalker one-shots the DK with Serenity. The Arms Warrior presses Sharpen on you and says go DK. Everybody says go DK. Run Bloodforged Armor. Try and stop DK from being the only kill target. That's everything. PvE talents, PvP talents, gear. That is how you build a character. Now, I'm going to grab my build. And then I'm going to grab the Blight build. And I'm going to give you some rotational understanding because this is very, very different, right? These PvP modifiers completely changed the spec. So I just want to give you a little insight into a PvP rotation that I would do. And I'll use the dummy for that. So Army of the Dead is a very good first button because it sets up your tier set, and also because it kind of has like a long build up time where they all start getting summoned, but you don't have to channel it like you used to, right? Back in the old days. All right, so you can just press this button, get the Army of the Dead out, and it'll just add for, it's 1 rune. It's not the most damage, but it's literally 1 rune. And it gives you your tier set. So you press that as you're kind of like demount chainsing, right? So you run in there, you demount chains the kill target, and then you Army of the Dead on your way in. Then, Unholy Assault. Limb I still use for just grips and runic corruption. I'm going to go over this side dead last because it has nothing to do, like the rotation all has to do with this. It has nothing to do with that. So there's timestamps, so you're probably not confused, but if you were confused, just click the one at the end. So I use A-Bomb in there for just a first grip and runic corruption because it just gives you so much rune generation, which is really nice. And it adds damage. And it's disruptive. It can grip a cast too, and it pulls everybody together, and DKs love when things are cleavable. So again, Demount Chains, Army of the Dead, Unholy Assault, APOC, Limb, Dark Transform with Empower macro to it, I actually have. And that will let loose your 4-set and start your burst. So this is, and then you do Burst or Wound with Scourge Strike or Clawing until you are out of wounds, and you only Fester Strike when you need 4 for APOC or you have 0 and you have already clawed all of them off. Then every time you get a Death Coil proc, you use it, effectively out-prioritizing even a Clawing Shadow with wounds still on them. And this is what that looks like. So, yeah. You're going to be seeing a lot of those add-on errors for the first few days of this patch. This is what it looks like. Army of the Dead. Get your diseases up. Unholy Assault, APOC, Limb to pull everybody together, Dark Transform with Thing, and now Death Coil, Clawing, Death Coil, Clawing, Death Coil, Clawing. Now Fester, Death Coil, clawing, Death Coil proc, clawing, Death Coil proc, clawing, Fester again. You can see how this number goes down to nothing before I ever press Festering Strike, right? I got one from my pet, I spend it again. Now I can press it. Now I have 4, right? If I had APOC, that would be a fantastic time to press. Okay, and Death Coil procs every time they come up. And that's just unlimited down. So that is the standard rotation. It's very, very global impact, right? Every time you press a button, it matters. Death Coil matters, clawing matters. Your cooldowns still set up the big sauce. Now I'm going to show you with disease. It is the exact same thing, but the only difference is with clawing, sometimes you could drop out and you could still focus on bursting wounds. With Plaguebringer, you don't really care about that as much. You just want to Blight on cooldown, right? So you have this extra 8% morbidity, and you just want to keep this buff up. Plaguebringer, right there, right? Because what that does is allows you to get kited a little bit, but as long as that Plaguebringer's up, let's say, kited, oh, I'm rooted, let me Wraith Walk over to him, boom, reapplied, right? It never fell. So that means my Virulent Plague with Eben Fever, right? All my other diseases, we're all still doing maximum dam because that Plaguebringer buff, and I can Death Coil to range, right? And that's why the rot pressure is so extremely high. Because you keep the Plaguebringer up, and then you get kited, but you used the Plaguebringer buff and the Scourge Strikes to generate Runic. Now you Death Coil while you're running back over to them, and then you reapply that buff. And then you Unholy Blight on cooldown. Because it's just raw pressure. And it just gives you 8% morbidity. You're not trying to sync Unholy Blight with everything. Anything at all. You're just trying to get the 6% morbidity buff to 8%. And that, my friends, is the Unholy Rotation. So that's all the builds, because all the builds, like I said, are a continuation of the structure that makes that rotation what it is. So the only other button you even have is Defile, and you press it on cooldown. You try and keep them in it by gripping them into it and changing them in it, or having them in a stun. Every time people are grouped up from limb or stuns, you drop down a Defile on their face, you get 8% mastery, and you cleave Scourge Strike, which bursts a ton of wounds and does an enormous amount of damage. That's everything. So finally, the left side of the tree. I have already talked about this in previous guides, and I think everybody knows them so well. So I'm going to do the quickest drive-by, and then when I get to the very end, I'm going to explain why I didn't swap out A-Bomb and Empower for Dark Pact and Unholy Bond like I've heard other people do. But in case somehow you just got back and you're brand new to the game, congratulations, welcome, you're here. This is how you get all the useful things. Everything in the top 6 here are just like mandatory, right? They're just here. They build the rest of the tree. Improved Death Strike has been nerfed, but it still increases your healing, and that is important. Stam is amazing to have as a DK. It just gives you more survivability. Short AMS is still really good, even though the healing is not really that good and it gets chunked off in 1 frame. Having it up to eliminate a Chaos Bolt or a Frost Bolt can be life or death, and 20-second cooldown reduction on CC immunity is fantastic. So even if you can't use it to save yourself, you can use it to prevent a clone or a poly or a root, and those things all keep your pressure high. Really good. There's blind AoE CC. There's IBF. This is your wall. You can probably drop. The one thing I haven't done yet is drop Merciless. The reason I haven't dropped it is because Death Coil crits, even with the 50% mod, feel so amazing that it feels like even having a little extra chance of having that happen can get them into Reaping range, and then I Death Coil crit into Clawing with Rotten Touch buff and Reaping buff into Death Coil and win the game. But absolutely, you could probably do something with Short IBF and Zone to get it down Asphyxiate and to get down to Proliferating Chill. So if you wanted to drop one of my talents and drop Merciless Strikes for Short IBF and Zone, you absolutely could do that. You would still follow the rest of this talent tree. You just need to free up one of them. Okay, Asphyxiate your CC. Wraith Walk is a decent movement spell for roots. Double Chains is just fantastic for peels and for keeping healers locked down. Then you go down this line to get Empower Rune Weapon, and I'll talk about that at the end. Runic Power spending abilities give you attack speed is fantastic for Unholy because your melee damage is okay, but the Death Coil procs is fantastic. Rune Mastery is just perma strength. A-Bomb Limb I talked about. Will of the Necropolis is nerfed, but it still is somewhat impactful. And then you go down the right side for a strength buff. Lichborn Wall, which is really nice, just gives you another wall in a longer duration. Immunity to Poly, immunity to Fear, immunity to Charm, and 15% damage reduction, which just feels really good to have as one more panic button for when you're getting low. D&D and Haste, especially good when you play Defile, because you'll be pressing D&D even more. And then Double Grip, Double DA, Double D&D. This is very good for Defile. It's very good for everything. Double Grip is extremely disruptive, and Double DA is extremely high mobility. So those are the key talents. Now again, I said I would talk about this, so I will. Some people have dropped these recently nerfed abilities like A-Bomb Limb and Empower to get more utility like Death Pact and Unholy Bond. Unholy Bond, as far as output goes, I do not think is comparable to A-Bomb Limb and Empower Rune Weapon together, because remember, this is a rank 2 out of 2, and these are each 1. So you get Empower Rune Weapon and Raise A-Bomb Limb for the 2 out of 2 on Unholy Bond. Unholy Bond does not have all of the extra effects, right? Empower Rune Weapon is only 5% haste, which is actually not bad. 5% haste is pretty comparable to 2% strength. But it also gives you Rune and Runic Power, which is off the global. You can just macro to your burst, and now you just get all of this resource gen, which makes all your other abilities more accessible, especially survivability buttons. And the A-Bomb Limb, like I said, it's still a triple grip, which yanks people together and can help with a blind, Defile, AoE stun, leg sweep from your teammate, Chaos Nova. It's disruptive on healers. It pulls them into bad spots. It stops casts. It stops lock casts. It stops Frost Mage casts. It gives you Runic Corruption, which is even more resource gen, and it still does damage from a 1 button, right? Maybe it only does 120k now, which is not the class-defining ability it used to be, but it's 1 button that does all of those things for 1 talent. 120,000 damage, no cost, resource gen, and disruption. So yes, I understand that these are very nerfed, and yes, I understand that, and I see that it says 73k, but you have a ton of modifiers like Fester Might, and it builds up a huge A-Bomb. I probably have an A-Bomb in one of these games, right? Where was that last game where the game went on a little longer? These healers were kind of throwing. Sorry, healers. This one was only 50k because he ported it. Let's see if we can get a bigger one. Oh my god, Going Mistweaver isn't it? Oh, there it is, 150k, yeah? So that's 150k button press with all the other tools. And that is effectively why I still run that. But even against the Mistweaver that got away from it, it still gave me a grip on his roll, which helps reduce his mobility, which is invaluable. And that's Unholy. I hope that you guys come back to the game and play this spec. It is tremendous now, and I think everybody I've talked to has enjoyed playing it. Pressing your buttons feels so good, and that's a good feeling. I hope this guide was able to help you, and thanks for watching. See you around. Peace.